it's something that I have not been capable of doing, and because I'm not a big fan of a lot of the trends in American art, and it also speaks to the complexity of being from the region that I'm from. You know, she mentioned.
Yeah, if you would dilate on that, because you're not Chicano, you're not Tejano.
And you look at the work that I'm depicting, I would never consider myself Chicano or even Mexican American. What I'm depicting is not happening in the barrio of Arlington or the barrio of McAllen or San Antonio or of Albuquerque. Everything happening here is happening on the Mexican side of the border. In a way, I came here when I was 9 years old. And again, something that is really interesting to me is that whole border region. It's not one or the other. It's its own little culture. It's not this area where that is clearly defined by whether you're Mexican or American. It's kind of like it's not black or white. It's many different shades of gray intermingling and blending into one another.
And then in Mexico, if you talk to someone from Monterrey or DF, they have a lot of similar stigmas about la frontera, la gente allá, that Americans do about the border. It's like the border on both sides is its own region of uncertainty.
So,
yes, we can audience question.
I want to ask, what do you consider the people from the valley that you don't consider yourself? Is it Chicano? Is it Mexican American? What do you consider yourself in the valley?
I would never speak for everybody in the valley because some people will be offended that if I call them Mexican, they might think of Mexican as a dirty word.
Yeah, but between y'all as friends, y'all talk, when y'all get together.
I think we all have very different distinctions.
Oh, you do?
I consider myself Mexican. I'm doing scenes that happen in a Mexican border town. The closer one that is to the U.S. border is that one because could be in a river. Yeah. Jesus, I don't know how Jesus,
Jesus is likewise complicated. I don't think I can hear me. Jesus is likewise complicated in that he has family in Progreso.
Yeah, I think he might consider himself Mexican also.
Yeah, and I think it's a problematic identity for him as well. He said to me very frankly and with very candidly, look, I know people on both sides of this narco war. I know people placed all over it. And I can't qualify any of them as evil. I know their individual stories, how they got sucked into it or left it. I feel likewise, like there's this flux, not necessarily this is Jesus talking, in my character, I don't feel uncertain, but it's really hard to square with what the United States of America thinks it is, and with what Mexico thinks it is. I don't feel like I have much in common with someone from Oaxaca, he said.
One thing that I've always found interesting when I was in school in New York, I met some people from Mexico City, and they would ask me, well, are you Mexican? What part of Mexico are you from? Like, well, I'm from Reynosa, border town. They're like, well, that's not Mexico anymore. That's the U.S. I grew up thinking that hot dogs and hamburgers were American street food. That's the nature of the border region. And then a few years ago, I met someone from Texas, and when I was in New Mexico, and he asked me, well, what part of Texas are you from? Like, well, I'm from McAllen. Like, well, that's not Texas anymore. That's Mexico. So see, that area has its own kind of unique culture, and it's neither the U.S. or Mexico.
Is there a similar set of complications in New Mexico? Was that something you felt growing up there? Was there a divided?
It's always divided.
Yeah.
There's always a divide. And there's a lot of writing that has been done on this, and it has to do with population that is disempowered. And part of being disempowered is the idea of being nameless. And that becomes the invisibility factor. That's how you become invisible. But sometimes there's comfort in it being invisible, right? In New Mexico, they do not want to identify themselves as being Mexican, even though they came up the Chihuahua Trail. It's like, and you can talk to, like an hermano, manito, and then that's how they classify themselves as being manitos. And they will say, somos españoles. Right? And it's like, there is no port of Santa Fe. There is no port of Santa Fe. There's not a port there, and you came up the Chihuahua Trail. Right? So, yeah, there is a whole issue of identity crisis.
What were you
that goes
told
through.
that you were when you were a little girl? What were you told in terms of identity?
I was told I was Spanish.
So that held true in your own family, that you were Españoles.
Yeah, you're not Mexican, you're Spanish. Right? But of course, I was growing up in the packing house districts of South Omaha, and you didn't tell a Mexican that you're Spanish. No, you don't do that. I found that out real fast. You don't do that. So when I was at school, I'm Mexican. And when I'm home, it's like, okay, Mom, I'm Spanish. And
See, that's a good example.
So you learn how to become invisible, and you learn how to shift the identity, right? And make it mold into your concerns and the reality at hand.
Roberto, is there no judgment in these paintings? Is there no good guys and bad guys?
It's from my perspective, everybody in that painting is a victim. The dead gunman on the floor is a victim. The little girl looking at you on this side is a victim. I don't see. I guess to me the villain, that might be too black and white, but is the many years of bad government in Mexico, and also capitalist interests that just see the benefiting for themselves and the excessive greed when they don't see what is being done to individual farmers in Mexico, where their children have to pick up a weapon and find in that way a way to support their families. So the villains will be somewhere way far away from this painting.
I know when
There are a couple of audience.
I'm struck by the police being masked. Is that true realism, or is that a choice?
Yeah, that is the way that the Mexican federal police and the army dress. They all have ski masks,
That's realism.
and the reason they do it is so that they're not identified by the drug cartels, and then.
Or if they're with the drug cartels.
Right.
And there was a case where Arturo Beltran Leiva, the head of the Beltran Leiva golf cartel, drug cartel, he was executed by the Mexican Marines, and the Mexican television made it a point to give the names of the Marines that had also died during that confrontation, and during the funeral of one of the Marines that had died, the family of this drug cartel leader, they shut up they fired randomly into the funeral home, and they killed some of the family of that Marine that had given his life for his country.
I
And
think
that's one of the reasons they cover their faces.
I know it's my